At 69, Johnny Unitas no longer looked like the golden hero America once worshipped. The jaw was softer, the hands twisted by years of breaks and surgeries. Those famous black high-top shoes now sat quietly in a closet. The leather cracked and tired, just like the man who once wore them. When reporters came, they expected stories of victory. Instead, he spoke of pain. "I wasn't special," he said softly. "I just didn't know how to stop." This is not of handback. He meant it. For 2 decades, he carried the weight of an entire city, the dream of a league, still learning what greatness meant. Every throw he made felt like a promise that hard work could still beat talent, that courage could still outlast fear. He had lived that truth until his body refused to follow. Now the game had moved on. The young quarterbacks were millionaires with clean uniforms and cameras in their faces. They smiled where he once bled. The league he built with his own bones had forgotten his name. But behind that silence, there was no anger, only the ache of someone who had given everything and watched it slip away. In the last years of his life, when fans stopped him on the street, they didn't ask for autographs. They thanked him. And every teammate, he nodded quietly, as if still calling a play only he could see. Because even at the end, Johnny Unitas was still in the huddle aiding for one more drive. Johnny Unitas was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the shadow of the steel mills. The air was thick with smoke and grit. And for young Johnny, that grit would become a way of life. His father died when he was just 5, leaving his mother to raise the family during the Great Depression. While other kids dreamed of escaping the soot and noise, Johnny found his escape in the rhythm of a football spinning through the air. It was a poor man's miracle. Something that didn't cost a dime, but could change everything if thrown just right. At the University of Louisville, he wasn't a star. Scouts called him too skinny, too slow, too ordinary. The Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him in the 9th round of 1955, only to cut him before he ever played a game. That rejection could have ended the story. Instead, it lit the fuse. Unitas spent his nights working construction, and his weekends throwing passes for a semi-pro team for $6 a game. Under the harsh lights of a high school field, he learned to read defenses, to survive broken plays, to command men older and bigger than himself. When the Baltimore Colts gave him a chance in 1956, he arrived, wearing the same black high-top shoes he had worn in those semi-pro games. They would become his trademark, a reminder of where he came from and what he had to prove. The league was brutal then. Before domes, before safety rules, before instant replay. Yet amid the chaos, Unitas brought order. He called his own plays, studied film like a general preparing for battle, and turned broken formations into legend. By 1958, he had led the Colts into what would be called the greatest game ever played. In Yankee Stadium, under freezing skies, Unitas marched his team downfield in the NFL's first ever sudden death overtime, defeating the New York Giants. That night changed everything. The game went national, television audiences exploded, and the NFL became America's new religion. At its center stood Johnny Unitas, the man who turned football from a working-class pastime into high drama. But while the public saw a quiet hero, those closest to him saw a relentless perfectionist who never stopped fighting the ghost of that first rejection. He trusted few, forgave fewer, and carried a private fear that the game could abandon him again. He had built his name from ashes, and he would protect it at any cost. Behind that legendary cool was a man at war with time, pride, and the changing world around him. The 60s would bring fame, fortune, and friction. Teammates, rivals, and coaches would all find themselves on one side or another of the man behind the golden arm. The countdown of Johnny Unitas's hidden truths was just beginning. Before the world saw Johnny Unitas as the man who redefined quarterbacking, one man saw him as a risk. Coach Weeb Ewbank, the bespectacled, soft-spoken tactician of the Baltimore Colts, wasn't convinced the kid from Pittsburgh had what it took to command a professional huddle. Ewbank came from the Paul Brown School of Precision, Systems, and Hierarchy. He liked quarterbacks who followed orders. Unitas was something else entirely. Quiet rebellion wrapped in a crew cut. When Unitas arrived at Colts training camp in 1956, his throws were sharp but unorthodox. His presence, commanding but unsettling. He wasn't loud. Yet every man in the locker room could feel his confidence. Eubank mistook that calm for arrogance. He benched Unitas early, letting veteran George Shaw start instead. But fate had other plans. Shaw went down with an injury. And Eubank, with little choice, sent in the kid with the black shoes. That moment changed football history. On his first play, Unitas fumbled. The next week, he returned and threw a touchdown that split the sky like lightning. What Eubank began to understand was that Unitas wasn't playing by instinct. He was seeing the game several seconds ahead of everyone else. He read defenses like a code breaker, turning broken plays into symphonies. Yet their relationship remained cold. Eubank coached from the sidelines, but Unitas led from the field. By 1958, tension brewed between coach and quarterback. Unitas often ignored calls from the sideline, drawing up plays in the dirt, trusting his own eyes. Eubank hated it, but he couldn't argue with results. The Colts were winning, and Unitas was turning football into art. In the locker room, teammates whispered that Eubank had lost control of his star. Unitas didn't care. He wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing perfection. Then came the title game at Yankee Stadium, the one that would make them both immortal. The Giants' defense hit Unitas relentlessly, but he kept standing. In the final drive of regulation, with seconds left, he completed pass after pass. Ice in his veins. He didn't even look at Eubank for instructions. In overtime, he finished the game with a 1-yard toss to Alan Ameche for the touchdown that crowned the Colts champions. The stadium roared. Television audiences gasped. And the NFL found its first true cinematic hero. After the victory, reporters surrounded Eubank, asking what he had told Unitas before that final drive. Eubank smiled weakly. Nothing, he said. Johnny already knew. The what of the commentator, and reftered. But beneath the surface, the relationship was fractured. Eubank wanted control. Unitas wanted autonomy. When Eubank was fired in 1963, Unitas barely reacted. To him, it wasn't personal. It was inevitable. Eubank would later win another championship with Joe Namath and the Jets defeating Unitas's Colts in Super Bowl III. For many, it was poetic justice. For Johnny, it was something colder. He never publicly spoke ill of Eubank, but those close to him said he never forgave the man who doubted him first. That silence was his revenge. To Unitas, the ultimate victory wasn't proving Eubank wrong on the field. It was proving that he never needed him in the first place. The man who made Johnny Unitas a legend was also the man who never believed he could be one. And for the rest of his life, Unitas never forgot who doubted him first. By the mid-60s, Johnny Unitas had become the image of discipline, toughness, and stoic excellence. Every kid who picked up a football wanted to throw like him, stand like him, and lead like him. But when Joe Namath arrived in the league in 1965, everything Unitas represented was suddenly challenged. Namath was the new generation long hair, white fur coats, and swagger that turned press conferences into theater. He wasn't a soldier of the old guard like Unitas. He was a celebrity in cleats. To Unitas, Namath's fame felt like a mockery of everything he had built. He had clawed his way up from poverty and rejection, his fame born of grit and precision. Namath, on the other hand, was Hollywood in shoulder pads. The kind of quarterback who smiled for the camera before he threw the pass. Their styles couldn't have been more opposite. Unitas called his own plays and read defenses like poetry. Namath relied on charisma, instinct, and a cannon of an arm. The rivalry simmered quietly at first, mostly in the headlines. Unitas rarely spoke to reporters, giving short, clipped answers. Namath gave interviews that filled pages, flaunting his lifestyle and his belief that he could beat anyone, including Unitas. The old guard bristled. The new generation cheered. The sport was changing, and Unitas was watching it slip away. Then came January of 1969. Super Bowl III. The Baltimore Colts, led by the aging Unitas, were expected to crush Namath's upstart New York Jets. The AFL was still considered inferior, its players undisciplined, its teams untested. When Namath famously guaranteed victory, the football world laughed. Everyone except Johnny. He didn't laugh because he knew arrogance had a strange way of bending fate. Unitas started the game injured, his arm never the same after years of punishment. He watched from the sideline as the younger quarterback across the field dismantled his defense. When Unitas was finally sent in late in the game, it was too late. The Jets had already made history. Namath walked off the field with his finger raised in triumph. And Unitas, the symbol of NFL dominance, watched his empire crumble under the floodlights of Miami. In interviews afterward, Unitas refused to praise Namath. He dismissed the performance as luck, saying quietly, "They made a few plays. That's football." But inside, the loss cut deeper than any sack. It wasn't just a game. It was a changing of the guard. For the first time, Johnny Unitas wasn't the face of the league. Namath became the darling of the media, the icon of freedom and fame that defined the 70s. Unitas retreated into silence, training harder, playing through pain, refusing to let the image of that raised finger define him. He returned to the field the next season with a grim focus, throwing until his arm could barely lift. Every pass felt like a statement that the game wasn't finished with him yet. Years later, when asked about Namath's guarantee, Unitas simply said, "That's not how we did things." It was the closest he ever came to admitting how much it hurt. For a man who built football on discipline, losing to the sport's first rock star was more than defeat. It was betrayal by the very game he created. When Weeb Elbank was gone, a new general took command of the Baltimore Colts. His name was Don Shula, a former defensive back turned head coach. Younger than most of his players, sharp-minded and obsessed with control. He admired Johnny Unitas, even idolized him growing up. But admiration has a strange way of turning sour when two strong wills collide inside the same room. At first, the partnership seemed golden. Shula brought discipline, tactics, and youthful energy. Unitas brought experience, authority, and a calm that could steady any storm. Together, they crafted one of the most efficient teams of the decade, marching through the league with a machine-like rhythm. But there was a silent tension between them. Who truly led the team? Shula wanted to modernize the Colts. He wanted systems, checklists, and predictable precision. Unitas wanted freedom. He trusted his instincts more than any playbook. During games, he would audible out of Shula's calls, changing plays at the line of scrimmage with a simple nod. The results were often spectacular. But to Shula, it felt like rebellion. He didn't want a quarterback who acted like a coach on the field. He wanted a soldier who followed the plan. Their arguments never exploded in public, but teammates saw the chill between them. They stopped speaking between drives. Their conversations reduced to brief exchanges through assistants. Still, the wins kept coming, and the facade held. To the outside world, they looked unstoppable. Inside the locker room, it was a cold war. The breaking point came in 1964. The Colts reached the NFL championship game, facing the Cleveland Browns. Unitas was brilliant early but faltered late as the Browns shut out Baltimore 27-0. Reporters called it one of the most shocking collapses in football history. In the locker room, Shula was furious, not at the loss itself, but at what he saw as Unitas's defiance. He believed Johnny had ignored too many of his plays, trying to do it all himself. Unitas, bruised and bleeding, stared at the floor and said nothing. That silence grew into distance. Shula's play calling became tighter. He drafted younger quarterbacks to challenge Unitas. Behind closed doors, he questioned whether his aging star could still carry the team. Unitas never forgave that betrayal. He had given Shula everything: loyalty, victories, even his body. And in return, the coach had treated him like a problem to solve. When Shula left Baltimore for Miami in 1970, Unitas didn't call to say goodbye. Years later, when Shula's Dolphins completed their perfect season in 1972, reporters asked Unitas if he was proud of his old coach. His reply was short and cold. He did what he had to do. This man of this servant and the adored batters and went out every D-sistis. To those who knew him, that one sentence said everything. It wasn't bitterness. It was resignation. Unitas understood that the game had changed again. The new NFL belonged to coaches with headsets and control rooms. His kind, the quarterbacks who ruled from the field, were fading. Yet even as he grew older, Unitas carried that wound quietly. Shula had been the one man who could have understood him, who could have walked beside him as an equal. Instead, he became another reminder that in football, loyalty is as fragile as a spiral in the wind. Don Shula wanted control. Johnny Unitas wanted freedom. In the end, both got what they wanted, but neither got what they needed. For years, Johnny Unitas had been the face of the Baltimore Colts. His grit sold tickets. His calm built legends. And his arm kept the franchise alive during some of the NFL's most turbulent seasons. But as the 60s gave way to the 70s, the world of football shifted from loyalty to business. At the center of that shift stood Carroll Rosenbloom, the team's charismatic but ruthless owner, a man who saw players not as heroes, but as investments. Rosenbloom had built his fortune from risk cards, hotels, and football teams. He loved the Colts, but he loved power even more. When Unitas first met him, the quarterback thought the owner's charm was genuine. Rosenbloom promised that as long as he lived, Johnny would retire a Colt. That promise would not survive the years to come. At first, their relationship was built on mutual respect. Unitas delivered championships. Rosenbloom delivered contracts. But over time, cracks appeared. The game had become television, and television demanded youth, speed, and spectacle. The aging quarterback no longer fit the image. His passes were slower, his body stiff, his hair gray. To Rosenbloom, Unitas was no longer a star. He was an asset depreciating by the week. Behind the scenes, the owner began cutting corners. He questioned Unitas's salary, demanded restructuring, and pushed the coaches to test younger replacements. Johnny's pride took every blow in silence. But his eyes told the truth. The man who had once been the face of the franchise was being erased from his own story. By 1972, their relationship was pure business. Rosenbloom refused to extend Unitas's contract, even as the city begged him to. It's time to move on, he said in interviews. For Unitas, it wasn't about money. It was about respect, a word that had guided every throw of his life. When Rosenbloom traded away the Colts' future draft picks, chasing quick success, Unitas publicly criticized him for the first time. It was rare for Johnny to speak at all, but this time he did. You can't build a team like a stock portfolio, he said. You build it with men. The quote made headlines. Rosenbloom was livid. 2 years later, the owner sold the team, walking away with millions. Johnny, battered and nearly broken, stayed behind to finish what he had started. But the damage was done. The Colts would never be the same, and neither would he. In private, teammates said Unitas never forgave Rosenbloom for turning football into business. He missed the days when it was about pride, not profit. When a handshake meant something. When loyalty still had weight. For Unitas, Rosenbloom's betrayal was not personal. It was philosophical. It was the moment he realized that the sport he had built was being stolen by men who never played it. Years later, when asked about the owners running the league, Unitas smiled faintly and said, "They're good at making money. I was good at making touchdowns. I guess we're even." But his tone told a different story. Carroll Rosenbloom turned the Colts into a brand. Johnny Unitas had built them into a brotherhood. When business replaced belief, the Golden Arm learned the game could break hearts, long after the final whistle. By the time Johnny Unitas took his final snap, the NFL he had built no longer recognized him. The league that once bowed to his precision now worshipped speed, marketing, and spectacle. The quarterbacks were younger, flashier, louder. The rules had changed to protect them. But no rule had ever protected Unitas. He had played in an era when men were hit like soldiers, when blood on the jersey was proof of loyalty. And for that sacrifice, he expected one thing in return: remembrance. But remembrance is fragile when business writes the history books. In the years after his retirement, Unitas watched from the stands as his records fell, and his name slowly disappeared from the broadcasts that once celebrated him. The NFL Hall of Fame inducted him quickly. Yet the ceremony felt sterile, scripted, devoid of the emotion he had earned. He smiled for the cameras, but friends said he seemed distant, as if standing in a museum built for someone else. In the 70s and 80s, the league exploded into a billion-dollar empire. Television deals multiplied, players' salaries soared, and sponsors replaced sweat as the engine of success. Unitas, meanwhile, lived quietly in Baltimore, running small businesses, attending local games, and watching a sport he barely recognized. His fingers, twisted from years of breaks and resets, could no longer grip a football properly. Reporters would sometimes ask him to pose for photos holding one. He would, but only briefly, before setting it down like a fragile relic. He had always believed the league owed something to its pioneers. Yet, as years passed, the invitations stopped coming. He received no calls from NFL headquarters, no honors during halftime shows. When he spoke critically of modern quarterbacks being overprotected, executives bristled. The image of Johnny U, once the embodiment of courage, no longer fit the sanitized corporate vision. The final insult came when the Baltimore Colts moved to Indianapolis in 1984. Under cover of darkness, their trucks sneaking out of the city before dawn, Unitas woke up to the news like everyone else. His team, his city, his legacy gone overnight. The betrayal was complete. He refused to associate himself with the franchise after that day. When invited to attend Colts events in Indianapolis, he declined, saying simply, "My team played in Baltimore. In their understated by a boddening of the fitted in lines, the non-mating backdade." And yet, Baltimore never forgot him. When the Ravens arrived years later, the city embraced them, but the people still wore Unitas jerseys in the stands. They remembered the man who had made them believe that a quarterback could be both warrior and artist. On September 11, 2002, Johnny Unitas collapsed at a local gym, his heart giving out after decades of battles. The city mourned as if a king had fallen. Fans gathered outside the old Memorial Stadium, lighting candles, whispering prayers, wearing black high-top shoes in tribute. He was 69 years old. The league he helped build issued a statement, brief and polished, but Baltimore's tears said more than any press release ever could. Johnny Unitas didn't just build the NFL. He bled for it. And, in the end, the empire he created turned its face away, leaving its greatest son standing alone in the fading light of his own legend. Every legend needs a witness. And for Johnny Unitas, that witness was Raymond Berry. The quiet wide receiver with soft hands and sharper focus was more than just his favorite target. He was the only man who truly understood the rhythm of Unitas's mind. Together, they rewrote the language of football route by route, gesture by gesture, eye by eye. Berry wasn't fast or flashy. He was a craftsman. Before games, the two would stay after practice long into the evening, running routes under empty bleachers. Berry memorized every detail: how Unitas tilted his head before a slant, how his shoulders shifted before a deep curl, how the laces left his fingers. Their connection became something mystical, a telepathy that defied defenses and turned broken plays into miracles. But what Berry saw off the field mattered more. He saw a man haunted by perfection, weighed down by expectation. In interviews years later, Berry said softly, "Johnny never wanted to be famous. He just didn't know how to stop working." When Unitas's health declined, Barry visited him in Baltimore. They talked not about championships, but about faith, family, and the price of devotion. At Unitas's funeral, Barry stood quietly in the back, head bowed. When asked to speak, he declined. Later, he told a reporter, "Everything I needed to say to Johnny, I sayed on the field. The debtors there. The debtors there. The debtors there." Raymond Barry caught more than passes. He caught glimpses of the man hidden beneath the myth, the humble worker who never stopped trying to be worthy of his own legend. There are athletes who define their era, and there are those who define the game itself. Johnny Unitas belonged to the latter. His name wasn't just etched into record books. It was carved into the DNA of how football would forever be played, seen, and felt. Long before the league became a television empire, Unitas gave it its first myth, a working man with a golden arm who turned chaos into poetry and silence into command. In the smoky light of black and white broadcasts, he became the blueprint of the modern quarterback. Every audible he called, every look he gave to a receiver, every fearless throw through impossible coverage, created a new language of leadership. He didn't wait for coaches to dictate the rhythm of the game. He dictated it himself, with the same confidence of a general on a battlefield. In that, he built the very foundation on which the NFL's greatest names, Montana, Brady, Manning, would later stand. Yet the paradox of Unitas's legacy lies in how quietly it faded from the spotlight. He was a bridge between two worlds, the raw, brutal purity of old football and the glossy, commercial spectacle that followed. The world moved on from dirt fields to domes, from blood-stained jerseys to brand deals. For many of the new generation, Unitas became a black and white photograph, a relic from an era too distant to feel real. But to those who understood the game, his presence remained everywhere, in the snap counts, in the 2-minute drills, in the courage to call one's own destiny under pressure. Baltimore, his city, never forgot. Decades after his last pass, fans still whispered his name like a prayer. The statue outside the Ravens Stadium shows him mid-throw, frozen in that eternal motion between precision and faith. The right arm, the slight tilt of the head, the cold calm in his eyes, all of it a reminder that greatness doesn't always need noise. Sometimes, it only needs conviction. Off the field, Unitas's story became a lesson in humility. He had earned millions in fame, but lost much of it in business ventures that failed. Yet he never complained. When asked once about wealth, he said, "I was paid to play football. The rest was just life." To the end, he carried himself like the man from Pittsburgh. He had always been practical, stoic, self-contained. You could say Unitas's greatest victory wasn't in the championships or the records, but in what he made people believe was possible. He showed that leadership isn't born from speeches or swagger, but from consistency, from showing up every day ready to fight, even when no one believes in you. His story turned the quarterback from a player into a symbol of the mind, the heart, and the soul of the team. Modern quarterbacks still trace their lineage to him. Every time a passer calls an audible, stares down a defense, or walks calmly into the huddle with the weight of a game on his shoulders, a part of Johnny Unitas lives on. His stoicism became the template for composure. His precision became the standard for excellence. His humility became the soul of the sport. But perhaps his most enduring legacy is the way he showed that greatness and pain often share the same heartbeat. The broken fingers that never healed, the quiet resentment toward a league that forgot him, the loneliness of a hero outliving his own myth. All of it was the cost of immortality. In those costs, Unitas revealed something that went beyond football. He showed what it means to give yourself completely to a calling, and to keep giving long after the world has stopped watching. Johnny Unitas didn't chase fame. He chased perfection. And though perfection never came, his pursuit of it gave birth to something even greater, the standard by which all others would forever be measured. The game may have evolved, but every quarterback still plays in the shadow of Johnny Unitas, the man who made football matter, who gave structure to chaos, and who proved that silence, when backed by courage, can echo louder than any roar. In the end, Johnny Unitas stood as something larger than sport. He was proof that greatness doesn't require charisma or noise, only clarity of purpose. His story began with rejection, rose through defiance, and ended with quiet dignity. The arc of a man who refused to let circumstance write his fate. Every pass he threw carried the same message, that precision can be a kind of poetry, that toughness can be tender, that belief, real belief, doesn't need applause to endure. When people speak of heroes, they often imagine perfection. Unitas never pretended to be perfect. He was stubborn, proud, distant. Yet those flaws made him real. And perhaps that's why he still lingers in the imagination of fans who never even saw him play. He represented something purer, the idea that discipline could be beautiful, that silence could be strength. He died as he lived, quietly and without ceremony. But the ripple of his life continues through every quarterback who steps under center. Every fan who believes that one man's will can still alter the course of a game. In an age where spectacle has replaced struggle, Unitas remains a ghostly reminder that authenticity never goes out of style. So when the floodlights fade and the crowd goes home, the echoes remain, the click of his cleats on frozen grass, the steady breath before a throw, the ball spinning perfectly through the cold air. That is the sound of football's soul, the legacy of a man who never asked for worship, only respect. Johnny Unitas didn't just play the game. He defined what it means to play it right, with courage, with control, and with a heart that never stopped beating for something greater than glory.